Today I want to revisit trimming the edges of books. When you're starting out, you'll have limited options. You'll almost certainly not have a plough or a guillotine. So your options are to do books that don't require the edges to be trimmed, to make friends with a bookbinder that has a plough or a guillotine, to pay someone to trim the edges of your books, or to make do with some other technique, such as I've shown in another video of using a box cutter or one of those snap-off blade cutters to trim the edges of a book. The problem with trimming a book this way is that it's really hard to do, and when you're starting out, the last thing you need is to make things harder. But since I've done this video, I've become aware of ways of using other knives, especially single beveled knives and presses, to simulate a plough essentially and get good results. So I want to look at these options in this video. I'm going to start by using this utility press. It's a copy of a Dryad press that was made many years ago, and it's just sort of an all-purpose press. So I'm going to put a cut into a piece of grey board behind the text block and another piece of grey board at the front of the text block, which is aligned to the mark that I want to trim to. So I'm going to drop that down so that front grey board is level with the cheek of the press. Now you need a press that's got a flat surface because we're going to use that flat surface to guide the knife. We'll use the knife by sliding the flat side of the knife on the flat surface of the press. Now bookbinders use a number of paring knives that have a single bevel, but instead of using a paring knife, which is a specialist bookbinding tool, let's start with a 1-inch woodworker's chisel. This is a nice chisel, but it's not a super fancy one. Any good hardware store will have a chisel like this. Now, when you buy a chisel, it's not sharp, so you do have to sharpen it, and there's lots of videos on YouTube for sharpening chisels. So I'm just practicing sitting the knife on the flat surface of the press because it's not really wide at the center of the press. And now I'm going to start slicing the edge of the book. Now I'm keeping the blade close to parallel to the book because that lowers the effective cutting angle of the chisel and it slices into the text block. So I'm just going to go back and forth, not putting too much pressure on the knife. I use my left hand fingers to press down on the chisel to try and keep it flat on the top of the press. And once you start working into the book, you've got more flat surface to run the chisel on. I did one practice go before I started the video, so this is only the second time I've tried this, and it's going really easy. It's much easier than trimming the text block with a box cutter, and as you'll see in a moment, the result is really good. It's almost as good as a plough. So a wood chisel works really well. So I wonder how a knife that's closer to the shape of a plough blade would work. So a French style paring knife is rounded like a plough blade, but not as pointed as a plough blade. But I'm curious to see how it goes. So let's reset the text block and I'll get my French paring knife and give that a go. Now of course all these blades, the chisel and the knives, are super sharp, so I strop them before I use them each time. You really can't expect to get a good result with a dull knife. I'm really curious to see how easy it is to use this knife or to see how well it goes, because Jeff Peachey does sell a knife that is specifically designed to trim the edges of books using the top face of presses, and it is a similar shape to this. So here we go. Again, I'm running it on the flat surface. I'm going to try and keep the flat side of the knife on the flat top of the press, and I'll just try and cut a few leaves at a time. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but this is really easy. It's going really well. It's not hard to control the knife. It's cutting really well. The press does want to move around on the bench, but I've sort of jammed it in place with some boards. I really wish I'd known about this option when I was starting out in bookbinding. At some point as you progress in bookbinding, you do need to get a press. And since this is the style of press that I started bookbinding on, a similar press to this, not this exact one, was the type of press that I bought first. Having this option would have taken a lot of pressure off buying that first guillotine. Now there are a lot of different types of bookbinding presses out there, and not everyone's going to have a press like that. Maybe you've got a press like this that has really wide cheeks, and you happen to have an English style paring knife that you've covered the handle in leather with, and it's not going to reach across the cheeks. You can't lay it flat on the top of the cheeks. So what are you going to do now? Fairly recently, Glenn Malkin did a great video on this subject. However, he seemed to make the solution more complex than it needed to be by having these boards either side of the book. It took me a while to realize that he was addressing this scenario. So putting the book between the boards gave an artificial top surface to the press. The knife can now be run along the top of the front board. However, a lot of these presses like this are quite shallow, so when you put the book in between boards and put it in the press, it'll sort of spread out at the top and it's not going to hold the book very tightly or firmly. So this is where the bricks come in handy. So prop the press up on some bricks and then you can lower the book into the press and it will compress the top of the book nicely. You do need to keep the book high enough that your fingers can fit underneath the knife as you slide it along that top surface. So we use a third type of knife, this time an English style paring knife. Now I'm going to try and keep that blade again fairly parallel to the text block, though because of the way I have to stand because of the camera, I do end up rotating my body a bit towards the end of the cut, which does dig in the point a little bit, but it still works really well. It works really well. The end result is a really smooth book edge. Using any of the knives or any of the press options, the one thing to be careful of is to not ride up on pieces of loose paper sitting on the surface of the book. So you try and move those out of the way. Some of the paper is still attached, so you don't want to pull those off because it will tear and that will leave a mark on the surface. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I don't have one of these beautiful finishing presses, so this is no good to me. Well, I'm not finished yet. Let's look at one more option. Let's try just using a couple of pieces of wood. These are just pieces of wood from the hardware store and some wood clamps and bricks. Now there are a few things to juggle in the setup. In Glenn's video, he does put some two-sided tape on the grey board and the wooden boards. Another bookbinder alternative to two-sided tape is a bit of spit, but that only works if you've got a waste sheet on the outside of your text block. I decided to video my very first attempt at this. I sort of figured that if I can get this first go without too much fumbling, then it must be a viable technique. And because I'm not using any specialist bookbinding tools, I'm going to use the wood chisel. Right away, I hit a small problem. The grey board was just sticking above the edge of the board at the left end. I could have just started again and pretended like it was my first go on my second go, but I thought that would be cheating. So I thought, can I recover this? So I'm going to work back and trim off the grey board and then start trimming the text block again. Again, it seemed a good test of how robust this technique was. And after getting the grey board trimmed up at one end, I was able to get back to trimming the text block just like in the other examples, and it started to work really well again. In the end, this edge is so good that I'd be hard-pressed to tell it apart from a ploughed edge. Since doing the original video of trimming the edge with the knife, I've become aware that this technique, or variations on this technique, is very common. A lot of people use it, and so it's not surprising that it works really well. I guess it was just something that I'd missed and was not aware of, but I am now, and I highly recommend it as an alternative to using a knife to trim a text block before you've got access to a plough or guillotine. It is slower and more fiddly than using my plough, so I'm not going to be putting my plough on Gumtree anytime soon, but it is a viable alternative. Finally today, I do want to address one other variation on this technique. Just as ploughs also have a vertical edge configuration, some people have mentioned that they use a vertical configuration of this technique, that they typically describe clamping the book horizontally on the edge of a bench. So I thought I'd give this a go as well. It is made a bit more complex for me because of the position of the camera. So I'm trying to reach over the camera to do this and not get my arms in the way. Even without the camera being in the way, I did find this variation more awkward. I didn't find this as comfortable or as natural, and in the end I got a bit frustrated with it and gave up before I'd even got halfway through. But I am quite willing to concede that it could be my technique or user error in this case, and that for some people this approach works really well and is their preferred method. So just because I can't do it, don't rule it out. So that's edge trimming done for today. I'm sure we'll revisit this sometime again in the future. I posted some extra material on Patreon this week. If you would like to and are able to, your support on Patreon would be greatly appreciated, and the link is in the description below. I hope you got something out of today's video. As always, I really appreciate you hitting the big thumbs up button. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. Hope everyone's staying safe, and until next time, cheerio.